on FM, on digital radio, on your mobile and online. This is London Greek Radio.
Hello and welcome to All About Autism, our monthly charity show here on London Greek Radio, aimed at helping us to understand autism better so we can share a better society for autistics and the whole autism community. My name is Dr. Chris Papadopoulos. I'll be your host for the next hour. I'm the father of 2 autistic children. I'm the founder and lead of the London Autism Group charity, and I'm a principal lecturer in public health at the University of Bedfordshire. As always, I'm joined by my 2 lovely co-hosts and charity volunteers, Sophia Christophi, who is herself autistic, and Ellie Kolatsi, a parent of a young autistic child. How are you today?
Good.
Yeah, we're good,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah.
How are you, Chris?
Yeah, pleased that the weather's
Yes.
improved a little bit finally.
Yeah, and last?
Yeah, and we've had half term, haven't we, this week?
Yeah,
Yeah.
nearly over.
Yeah, how's that been for your son, Ellie?
Difficult at the beginning, changes are always hard, and then middle, sort of getting into the swing of things, and then towards the end, worries about going back, so
Yeah.
I think the short breaks are quite difficult.
Yeah, that's right. The same with my children. They always struggled with the
Yes.
transition and the lack of routine. But it is what it is. How about you, Sophia?
Yeah, I'm okay. I'm not on half term
Yeah.
at university, but I've been collecting data this week for my PhD, so
All right.
that's been an interesting experience.
Okay. Well, interviewing people.
Yeah, running experiments using virtual reality and some short interviews afterwards as well.
All right. Do we need to put a call out for participants on the show? Or have you not got ethical approval for that?
No.
Hey, let's do what we want, right? No one minds, surely. But good. Anyway, the PhD is going well, though, right?
Yes.
All right, good stuff. Well, as always, as listeners may know, on each monthly episode, we focus on a different topic connected to autism. And for today's show, we're going to be focusing on the very, very important topic of employment for autistic people. So, obviously employment is extremely important for all people, including for well-being, right? I mean, if you're in good employment and you're happy, it's fantastic for well-being. Yep. But unfortunately, when you look at the Office for National Statistics latest data on employment rates, and you look at, how many autistic people, what the proportion of autistic people are in employment is, when you look at the data, it says that as of June 2021, which is the latest data, so it's a couple of years old, but as of then, 29% is an estimated proportion of autistic people in employment. 29%. The average, not the average, the full employment rate among the general population in England is 75.7%. So 29% compared to 75.7 is pretty low. And in fact, when you look at all the various types of disabilities and employment rates, autism is right at the bottom, unfortunately. So people with epilepsy, depression, difficulty in hearing, disfigurements, other types of disabilities, all of these groups have substantially higher rates of employment compared to autistic people. And obviously that's really, really sad and very concerning. So, we have to question why these rates are so low, and that's something I'd like to just briefly talk about firstly. But in fact, before we get into the reasons for why these rates may be so low, Sophia, would you mind let's go back to basics a little bit for our listeners in case it might be helpful for our audience. Sophia, would you mind just reminding everybody listening, what do we mean by the terms neurodivergent and neurotypical? I think that might be nice to just go back to basics first.
Sure. So somebody who's neurotypical is a person who thinks, behaves and perceives the world in ways that the general population would consider to be the norm, so the majority of people. And if you're neurodivergent, you think, learn and behave differently from what is considered typical. And you can be neurodivergent in many ways. You might be autistic, you may have ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, Tourette syndrome, or you may have multiple conditions that make you neurodivergent. But essentially, somebody who's neurodivergent, their brain is working differently from the general population.
And Ellie, would you like to just give us a little overview as to what functioning labels are and why you think they may be problematic? And this is obviously relevant for employment as well.
It is, yeah. So, yeah, these labels are problematic and a bit outdated, actually. They're not helpful at looking at the uniqueness of the person. So if someone is labelled as high functioning, they may have invisible challenges that are not being addressed, because it might appear that they are coping, and that's not the case. And in the context of employment, then say you have to wear a uniform and you have sensory issues, that could be problematic, or being in a room where lights are too bright or the temperature's not right, or there's smells. So all these kind of sensory issues can impact the way that you work. So, you know, it's important to make adjustments for people with such differences, and we know that it's important to kind of be aware of these things that could cause challenges, and instead of using these labels, I think support needs is better. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's what we advocate for in the charity.
I think the labels high and low are just...
They're not helpful.
They're not helpful at all.
Yeah.
So I think, just the last point, I think it's important that we have spaces, we create spaces where people feel valued and they belong. I think that's really important for everyone to be aware of.
Yeah, I totally agree. So let's go back to what I was talking about earlier. 29% of autistic people are supposedly in employment. I use the word supposedly because these are the official statistics. We don't entirely know how they capture this data, and it could very well be that a lot of data is being missed. However, it is still concerning that it's a low number regardless. How would you interpret that, Sophia? What is your feeling, what is your view on why that is such a low rate?
Well, given that the number is so low, it also suggests that there's probably many autistic people that are in employment but haven't disclosed that they're autistic, which suggests that they don't feel comfortable or safe to do so in that setting. So I imagine that there are many autistic people in employment in a variety of jobs, but whether their employers know that they're autistic because of fear of kind of stigma about disclosing to colleagues, probably means that lots of autistic people are not telling other people that they're autistic, and therefore not receiving the accommodations or the support that they would be entitled to.
Yeah, definitely. Ellie, have you got any view on it?
Yeah, no, I think it is due to the stigma. I think if you disclose, what will happen? What will happen to the information? What would I be able to ask for an adjustment? Could I have perhaps the lights low, or the temperature raised, or I think all these things impact on the way that you disclose and how the other person reacts to it.
Right, I agree. So we're going to come back to this later on in the show, because it is a crucial issue. You know, what is it that is going to help make autistic people in employment disclose more? Because obviously, you know, we know from the statistics and the research that there should be many more people than what these statistics suggest that are in employment, right? So it is got to be partly down to disclosure, but also partly down to other reasons, like, for example, employers simply not creating the right types of opportunities, or being discriminatory at point of access. So we'll come back to this later on in the show, but I thought it would be useful just to give a little bit of context for why this is such an important topic to discuss today, and the reality of it being quite a significant issue for the autistic population, which is a real shame given how crucial employment is for well-being and just surviving in life generally, isn't it? So, as always, we welcome any questions or points of view from our listeners. So if you've got anything to share on this topic, please do contact us You can text us quite easily on 0737 661 1033. That's 0737 661 1033. And we'll look at what your message says, and we'll read it out on air and discuss it, which will be fun. Have a nice little bit of audience participation. We really welcome that. So we'd love to hear from you. If you would like to text us on the show, we'll pick up the message. We'd love to share your question, your story, and discuss it. We'd love to hear from you. The number is 0737 661 1033. That's 0737 661 1033. Okay, so as we were talking about earlier, we're having a show about employment and employment discrimination for autistic people in our latest All About Autism show. So thank you for tuning in, and we're going to continue this topic.
So Chris, would you mind telling us, our listeners, what the Equality Act is and why it's important in the context of autistics in employment?
So you can't talk about or think about employment discrimination, or the issue of employment discrimination, without thinking about or knowing about what the Equality Act is, which is a really important and relevant piece of legislation that the UK brought into effect in October 2010. So it has been around for a little while now. It replaced previous anti-discrimination laws with a single act, which is aimed at making the law simpler and to strengthen the protection of autistic people and other people in some situations. This is the theory anyway. The legislation covers 9 protected characteristics which cannot be used as a reason to treat people unfairly. And the characteristics are age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion or belief, sex or sexual orientation. And autism, of course, falls under the category of disability. And that's why the Equality Act is so relevant and crucial for autistic people. More specifically, in terms of what it supposedly does to protect autistic people, there's different types of protections it offers. Firstly, protection from direct discrimination. So this means that autistic people can't be or shouldn't be treated any less favourably than another person in a similar situation just because they're disabled or autistic. Also, protection from indirect discrimination. So indirect discrimination happens when there is a rule or a policy or a practice in the employment context that applies to everyone, but it particularly disadvantages autistic people or any of these people with these protected characteristics. So, for example, let's say there's a rule that it requires every employee to work in person at the office every single day for certain hours, and that applies to everybody, but could potentially very well be disadvantageous for autistic people. Then something, the next point, which is really crucial, we're going to discuss in more depth, is reasonable adjustments. So the Act brings this concept of reasonable adjustments into play, whereby there is a duty on organisations to provide so-called reasonable adjustments to their practices. This might include the physical features of their premises, or to provide certain services or aids or adjustments for autistic people. And we're going to talk about that in some more depth as we move forward. This means that if something is putting a disabled person at a substantial disadvantage, the organisation they're legally bound to take reasonable steps to prevent or avoid that disadvantage. Then just lastly, a couple more points. There's supposed protection from harassment. So the Act protects autistic people from harassment related to disability. And harassment is defined as an unwanted behaviour linked to protected characteristics that can violate a person's dignity or make them feel very offended. And then protection from victimisation. So if an autistic individual makes a claim of discrimination under the Act, they are protected from being victimised for making that claim. So there is a lot to it. So then I guess the next point to discuss is this very important area of the Act that centres on reasonable adjustments. So Sophia, what do you think about this? Could you give us an example of what reasonable adjustments employers might create, or have you got any views on this?
Yeah. So I think reasonable adjustments would vary hugely between the individuals that are working in a particular place. But one example of a reasonable adjustment is to adapt the workspace. So it may be that the autistic employee has a quieter space to work, or if you're in an open plan setting kind of thing, then they might be able to use noise cancelling headphones. Some autistic employees may need a clear plan for what's going to happen during the work week or the work day. So if the work week was suddenly going to change and be kind of a week of training, then a reasonable adjustment would be that the autistic employee is given as much notice as possible to prepare for those changes. They may also offer flexible hours, including being able to work from home at times if necessary. But I guess it would be different for every autistic person as to what would best suit their needs. But often I personally think that reasonable adjustments are things that can quite easily be put in place.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Like, who, from whose perspective are we defining what reasonable is? I think that's the thing. And I think ideally it should be coming from the person that requires the additional support, right? So for them, if they view the implementation or creation of a sensory room as something that is reasonable, given that it is in place perhaps in other employers, then that's where we should be coming from, not the employer's view as to whether or not something like that is reasonable, right? But that's often not the case, is it? It's often from the point of view of the employer, for financial and practical reasons, which is understandable, but you really have to focus and value on the person's viewpoint as well, as much as possible, right?
Do you mean more a well-meaning intention from the employer rather than it coming from the employee? But then again, it would have to mean that the employee would disclose. That's right.
Yeah. Great point. So this comes back to why it's sort of so important for the employee, the autistic employee, if possible, to disclose, because then, of course, it can lead to the fact that they're going to be protected from the Act, the Equality Act, and then these reasonable adjustments. And that's ultimately one of the key reasons why disclosure is so important. So we've got to create these spaces for autistics to be able to feel comfortable to disclose. But perhaps we'll come back to that afterwards. In terms of, I just mentioned sensory room. Like, what is a sensory room? Because, how would you define that? Ellie, have you got a view of it?
I think probably Sophia would help me with this one. I mean, I've got a different view for sensory rooms. I mean, it's the least kind of possible sound and light for me.
So I've noticed that as well about sensory rooms. A lot of kind of companies that put in sensory rooms then go and put every type of sensory experience in that room. Light, sound, and kind of inducing sensory overload. Whereas to me, a sensory room should be somewhere that has kind of sensory aids, but that you're in control of. So if you need light, you can use light. If you need sound, you can use sound, rather than kind of just walking into this room that's just really overwhelming. So I agree. My idea of sensory rooms is to be able to control my sensory environment rather than be immersed in this sensory experience that I wasn't expecting.
So I suppose that's important from you coming in and being able to say, this is what I need. And each person is different and has different needs and has a different thought about the sensory experience.
Which is why I think the sensory aids should be available, but that people can use them how they see best, rather than it all just being there and on constantly.
And I think your experience of being in these overly sensory rooms is probably down to the fact that the employers took a sort of standard approach, thinking, okay, we need a sensory room, and let's throw all the sensory stuff in there, as opposed to well, what does it mean to the autistic employees themselves. Really interesting stuff. What other types of adjustments would you say are reasonable, or you've seen, or you might suggest to employers, Ellie and Sophia?
So I think if the person is happy to disclose early on, then they may also be able to get some reasonable adjustments during the interview process. So that could be things like having the questions in advance so that you can prepare your answers and know what to expect, know what you're going to be asked. You may also be able to have a reasonable adjustment around the clothing that you wear to an interview. So typically people are expected to wear very formal clothing at an interview, maybe a tie if you're a man, and that might not work for autistic people. They may find that restrictive and uncomfortable. So if somebody is happy to disclose that they're autistic at that stage, it could also help the interviewing process as well, I think.
Yeah, that's something I'm proud to say that the charity tries to do. You know, so when we don't try not to formally interview people, because we're not a big believer in that kind of process. But when we're meeting people for the first time, you know, volunteers, for example, that are interested in connecting with us, we'll always say, look, we're going to meet with you. Here's what we're going to discuss up front. Any questions that you have, please let us know, and we'll integrate that into the schedule. Try and make it as predictable as possible for whoever it is, because even though it's just perhaps a volunteering position, that for them could still be very anxiety producing, just that conversation.
Yeah.
We also we sort of had somebody that we employed for a brief period of time, and I remember he told us to, whenever we sent him documents, you know, like his contract or role descriptions and things like that, he asked us to send it in high contrast colours, so that the background was black and the writing was orange. And so, you know, that's really important, that he felt capable and welcome, you know, open to tell us this, and that we, you know, it's no problem for us. You know what I mean? That could be the difference between him being able to read it or not, you know? So things like that. Yeah,
it's a shame that interviews seem to be more focused on how the person presents rather than them being able to do the job. So there's like a big pressure on what you're wearing, how much eye contact you can maintain, all this stuff that disadvantages autistic people. And actually there are lots of autistic people out there that would be good at a variety of jobs, but they're not able to get past that initial stage to demonstrate the skills that they have. So if employers could be more reasonable in that sense too, I think it would encourage many more autistic people to go into employment.
Yeah. What do you reckon, Ellie?
Yeah, I mean, God, there's so many points, but I think my main thing is about, it doesn't have to be a really major adjustment. Like, we don't have to restructure things. You could, you know, have a space. If the person wants to work near a door, move the desk near a door, or have kind of different lighting, perhaps, if that's possible. So enabling and empowering the employee to be able to control your environment has such a massive impact on their work, on their working life, on their well-being. The productivity will be different. I mean, enabling that and enabling the person to be able to come out and say things is huge. I think it's so important.
Yeah, and it usually is like hugely beneficial to the autistic person and doesn't make much difference to anyone else. So like where I work, I normally leave the light off, and that works for me perfectly fine, and it also doesn't affect anybody else in the office. So I'm able to do what I need to do whilst everybody else does what they need to do. It's not an adjustment that kind of interferes with anybody else's experience in the workplace. So I agree. They're often really small changes that make a big difference for autistic people.
Yeah, totally agree. For example, just sort of enabling work breaks. You know, I mean, little breaks, like sort of factoring them in, or encouraging them. You know, just making that really, really clear could make quite a substantial difference. So there's lots of, you're right, it's not, that's why it's called supposedly why it's called reasonable, because it's not you're not sort of changing the world, you're making clever, efficient changes that could maybe benefit many of the non-autistics as well. So but having said that, I do think, you know, in terms of major changes, being a little bit more creative with our thinking, maybe in the future it could very well be better if we avoid the interview process entirely for autistic people, you know, because the interview process tends to just be one big barrier. And you're missing out on a lot of talent. And ultimately, my view is, if you're evidencing on paper that you can do the role, and you've got the skills and the track record and the ability and the potential, and you're doing it on paper, what is the point of going further beyond that? All you're doing is inviting, I think, the opportunity for unconscious bias. I mean, everybody, all these organisations these days have unconscious bias training, right? But that's often just a tick box exercise, isn't it?
I agree.
You know, we had an unconscious bias, but that doesn't prevent necessarily. I haven't seen any research that shows that unconscious bias actually truly prevents unconscious bias, because if that was the case, then these rates with employment would be higher than 29%.
Yeah.
You know? So what is the point? What do you think? Am I being overly controversial?
No, I think it would be great if the interview process was adapted for autistic people to be able to actually demonstrate their skills, rather than have to kind of sit and just be able to be very good at talking about what they can do, rather than what they can actually do.
And even before, like, where do these job adverts go? Who are you targeting? Are you reaching your net more broadly? And also, if you do ask an autistic person to come in for an interview, have you given clear instructions of where you are located? Who are you going to meet? Why can't you picture the room that you are going to interview the person? Picture the people who are going to interview the person. Send them the questions previously. Also, all those kind of things that make such a huge difference, and enable the person to come in with a more kind of comfortable kind of persona, if you like.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately the game has to be making it as accessible and fair as possible. I mean, I just personally think that interviews kind of just prevent that and allow these unconscious biases, as I said, to creep in. And then you've got these problems of low employment rates or poor disclosure, you know. So, you know, there's nothing wrong with employers thinking big. I mean, if it comes down to the fact that, let's say there are 3 or 4 applications that are very, very similar, one of them happens to be autistic and the other 3 are non-autistic, well, they haven't disclosed. Okay, in that instance, you're lucky. You've got 4 very capable applications. You know, make a random choice. It could be down to random choice. You know, why have to go through the rigmarole of who do you feel you know, suits your employer the most, you know, through an interview. It's really, I don't understand the point, honestly speaking. Yeah.
Well, it seems this is a very complex issue, so if there are any employers out there that want more guidance on this, please do contact the London Autism Group charity, and we could potentially assist with that.
Yeah, that's right. So we can come in, we've done this before, we have people that can come in, conduct a sort of they're called ergonomic surveys, and go in there and assess the processes and the structures and communication styles that are in place, and make recommendations for how you could be more inclusive for your autistic and non-autistic employees. So yeah, thanks for saying that, Sophia, and definitely do contact the charity if you're an employer listening and you're interested in doing that. Final reminder that if you'd like to share your question or thoughts or story, please do text us. We'll cover it in the next segment for sure. Our number here is 0737 661 1033. That's 0737 661 1033. So just send us a text and we'll read it and discuss it.
Welcome back, everyone. So, Chris, at the beginning of the show, you mentioned some relevant employment statistics. Can you remind us what they were, and do you think they are reliable?
Yeah, thanks, Ellie. At the outset of the show, I just pointed out the fact that according to the latest ONS, you know, the Office of National Statistics data on employment rates among disabled people, that autism is among the lowest. It used to be the lowest, actually, if you broke it down per disability. Autism The year prior was even lower in terms of rates. I think it was like 24%. Now, the latest data, according to the 2021 reports that we have, state 29% of autistics are in employment, and people with severe or specific learning difficulties, it's 26%. So they're actually a little bit lower. But of course, you get interconnections between the two, don't you? Now, this is a big problem, 29%, because we know from all the research, and we just common sense as well, that large majority of autistic people want to be in employment. So it's not a matter of desire. So what's going on here? Are these statistics reliable? Well, as we discussed before, I think one of the reasons why they may not be reliable is because there are going to be a substantial number of autistic people who are in employment but are not disclosing. And if they're not disclosing, then these numbers are not going to be reflecting the real number. So it could very well be higher than what the official statistics say. But even if you factor in the realities of it, it's still lower than the general. It's going to be lower than the general population of 75%. So there's this wider question of why it's lower, and that is down to employment discrimination, I think. But let's just rewind back to this disclosure thing first. So we need to find ways of increasing the likelihood that people will feel safe to disclose. Have either of you got any views on how we can change this? Like what needs to change in order for autistics to feel safe to disclose, either at the job application stage, the interview stage, or when they're in employment itself? I think ideally the earlier the better, but you will take any point, really.
Yeah, I think as an autistic person, I would be much more encouraged to disclose if I knew that there were other autistic people working in that place who had already disclosed. That would make me feel much more comfortable in disclosing, knowing that there's other people that have been there and they've said that they're autistic and they're working and everything seems fine. I guess I've been kind of lucky in places where I've worked. I've usually worked with autistic people or autistic children. So actually disclosing in the interview has turned out to be beneficial because they've appreciated my first-hand experience of autism. But I can imagine if I was going for a job that wasn't related to autism, I don't know in that situation if I would be as keen to disclose, or if I would feel that they may have too many misconceptions, or they may make assumptions about my ability to do the job. It may end up being something that I just keep to myself, which would then result in not having any reasonable adjustments. And
then you're going to struggle more. Your anxiety is going to be higher.
Yeah, eventually it's not a long-term solution.
No.
But yeah, knowing that there's other autistic people in the workplace, I think is really helpful to autistic people.
Yeah. What do you think, Ellie?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think representation is everything, and I think even going back to school and young people, how they see themselves. Do they see themselves in university, in a workplace situation? Is difference celebrated? How do people react to difference? I think that's really important, and I think it starts from way back from when children are young. Do I see myself in any of these people? Is it safe? Can I do this?
Yeah.
Do I feel okay?
I think that's the thing, isn't it? Normalising it from an early age so that it just carries through to the different stages in life, to school, to university, to the workplace. But at the moment, it's a bit like you go through school, you go through university, and you get to a workplace, and it's the start again. Yeah. You've not really kind of got anything to carry along with you. You're meeting a whole new lot of people. You don't know what their knowledge of autism is. It's just not talked about enough. Yeah. Still, even though we're trying to.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, talking about it, just continuing to talk about it is crucial still, isn't it? But yeah. No, I totally agree. I think I just started, thinking about what can we do right from the schooling time solve this is going to be really important. But I just wanted to just sort of describe a little experience that I had recently. I think is an example of what employers could do to try and help, with this issue. And it kind of relates to earlier to what you were saying, Sophia, about you'd feel more comfortable disclosing if you knew autistic people were happily in employment at this position. So I visited an organisation a couple of weeks ago. Lovely place, very, very, very good, all good. And they wanted me to give a talk on autism and neurodiversity, which I did. It was really nice. And they wanted to show me, they're very proud. They had this sensory room, going back to sensory room, and they sort of took me over there and showed it to me. It wasn't called sensory room. I think it was called calming room or something to that effect. It was actually a very quiet space, and it was for any of the employees, not just for neurodivergent people, to go in when they're feeling stressed, close the door. It was very, very quiet, and just scream in the cushion if you want, or even take a nap. They had a little nap, a little bed in there, and it was nice. It was good. Not perfect, but it was good. And I said to them, well, is this something that you advertise during your job application process? When you put it, obviously often it's not just the person job that the job spec that goes out, but also a sort of a pack of information about the employer, right? A description about the employer. Is the fact that you are thinking about these things and you have such spaces in the descriptions that go out, and they say, oh no, we never thought about that. That's not something. And if you, Sophia, as an autistic person, if you're reading about a job and they're openly saying that we have structures in place to support autistic people, and here's an actual concrete example of something that we do that helps, that's going to at least give you a little bit more confidence, isn't it?
Yeah, that would immediately make me think that they've done some research or they've spoken to some autistic people. They definitely should advertise those things if they're available, because it'd make a difference to an autistic person reading the application knowing that this place already has some things in place, and therefore may seem like more of a safe employer to disclose to as well.
Yeah, totally. So it could very well be that a lot of employers are actually doing some good things, but they're not thinking about highlighting that right at the point of advert, which is preventing perhaps a little bit of interest or application from neurodivergent people. So it's really important to be proud of the things that you're doing, and also just to make it clear that you would be keen to learn from neurodivergence. That's the other thing. I think if you put that, if you're as humble as that, to say, what, we've got these things, but we still, if you were employed, we'd still love to learn from your experience and your perspective. Yeah,
there's so many neurodivergent people out there who are willing to share their experiences and try and give the insight to shape these future changes. So, make use of us.
Yeah, and when I was doing... Yeah, absolutely. And when I was doing this talk, I said that, they asked me, can you tell... I gave the talk, and one of the employees asked me, what are a couple of things that we could do as an organisation that could improve these issues? And I said that, are you leaning in to your neurodivergent employees to learn from them as to how to make this a more accessible environment? Oh, no, we haven't got anything like that. Disclosure is still a bit of an issue, and... Well, it starts with one person, and then you build on it step by step. So, if you want to learn how to make your workplace more inclusive, the answers are all with your employees, and they're going to feel really valued if they're listened to as well, So it's a win-win to do that. The other thing I said, I remember, so we went, when I visited this place, we were asked to sit in this waiting room, and it was this open waiting room that wasn't separate. It wasn't a separate waiting room. It was kind of one big open plan room, right, with all the employees working around me. But the waiting room was just there in the corner, and it was a bit of a sensory nightmare, honestly speaking. It was very loud. They had this very large lamp right next to me, which was emitting incredible amounts of heat, as well as
you could blinding me. The electricity as well.
But for them, they're not thinking like that. They're thinking, this thing looks really cool. Do you know what I mean? Because it was a cool lamp. Do you know what I mean? It was unusual, it was artistic. But, you know, if I'm an autistic person going into that waiting room, I've already got, let's say, for example, I'm going into a job interview, right? And I'm going to sitting in this waiting area, and I'm already anxious, you know, and then I'm sitting there, and there were no sensory items for, you know, a little bit de-stressing, if you wanted to, or anything like that. There's all this mad and sensory stuff going around me. You know, it's not, why not change it? Why have this open plan waiting room? You know, have an optional room that's to the side, which is quiet, and think about how you can this is the other thing I said, think about how you can transition from the waiting room to the interview or the meeting, you know, because the transitions are also really important, you know.
I think at the very least, autistic people should be able to see what the environment's going to look like. So if you can't yet make those big changes, I mean, taking a photo of the space and sending it to the autistic person saying, this is where you'll be sitting, is there anything we can do to make you more comfortable, would be a good start. I remember actually a friend of mine doing that for me when I first went to her house. I'd never been to her house before. She knew that going to a new place would have been scary for me and unfamiliar, so she took a picture of the drive, she took a picture of the inside, she took a picture of where I'd be sat, and it just meant that when I got there I knew what to expect. So it's something that employers could do as well to make things less unpredictable.
Yeah, my autistic son, my eldest, he always goes on Google Street View and always carefully examines what it looks like, not just from the outside, but the route, what the route will how it will develop, and what kinds of landmarks to look for, and that Google Street View thing has been really useful, hasn't it?
But I was just going to say, all these points that we're talking about, this is the whole point of listening from an autistic perspective and learning from that. I think it's really important, because some of these things you can overlook quite easily, but it would benefit everyone. So from that waiting room, it would benefit everyone, really. We're not having a glaring lamp, having a hole in your head and going ahead with the business of the day. But I think that's the whole point of learning and being open to changing things. And they're not massive things. When you were talking about sensory things, what were you talking about, Chris?
I was thinking just, fidget toys, or poppets, or stress balls, things that I can just, I could see people maybe just...
So having just a basket there and just having them...
Why not? That's something. You don't have to use them if you don't want to, but have something.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to our last episode on inclusion, is that if the sensory toys are just there, and nobody has to go and ask for it, it's just a normal thing that's there. Yeah. So it'll benefit the autistic person, and if the neurotypical person also wants to use it, then they can. It's not this kind of reasonable adjustment that stands out in any way. We've just adapted the entire environment to make it better for everyone.
Normalising it.
Yeah.
Definitely agree. So, just before we go to the break, just another little thought that I had that I'd share when you were saying about, knowing what the environment looks like before you enter it. Perhaps in the future we can use, there'll be sort of virtual reality where people can put that on and just actually sort of virtually explore the environment before they go in.
Yeah, this is exactly what I've been working on this week.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
All right. Tell us a little bit more.
The real world applications of using virtual reality with autistic people. It could even be useful for things like practicing going around a supermarket. So you could have a virtual reality of a supermarket. You could have people in the supermarket. And you could allow people to experience what they need to know what to expect from the comfort of their own home. Or if they're going to a new place, they can check it out before they go. Or if they're at a new place and they miss the comfort of home, they can also put their virtual reality headset on and be at home. So
yeah, really
I think
good.
virtual reality is going to be something really cool for autistic people in the future. Really beneficial.
Yeah. I mean, you could even go on something like ChatGPT now and say, what if I'm going to go into this kind of environment? Let's say, for example, you're going to an accident and emergency environment and you've not been there before or not for a long time, you don't know what to expect. You could type in, couldn't you? I'm an autistic person, I've not been in this environment for a long time. What should I expect by going into this environment, like what kinds of things might affect my anxiety, for example, and it could list out. So you can do kind of that, lean into different technologies like AI or VR in the future to help prepare. Yeah. Interesting stuff. All right. So, oh no, it's not a short break, is it? It's the end. I apologise. I was getting too eager and excited about things. Yeah, we'll just continue discussing things. Well, okay. Well, it has actually been a great discussion, I think. Yeah, thank you so much. Then thanks for everybody for listening and tuning in. It is officially a wrap for today's show. So our next show is going to be taking place on the 6th of July at 7 p.m, which is, as always, the first Thursday of the month. So All About Autism is always on the first Thursday of the month. I'd like to remind you that you can pop into one of our charity community cafes to meet the community and to meet us if you wish. Currently we have community cafes in Southgate, Islington, Ealing, and we're about to launch one for the first time in Woodford. So if you're listening from Woodford on the 25th of June, 1 p.m. to 3 p.m, we are launching a new community cafe at St Mary's Church. So we'd really love to see you there. All of these community cafes and their information about them can be found on our website, which is londonautismgroupcharity.org. That's londonautismgroupcharity.org. And you can find out more about all of the other services and things that we do to support the community. Thanks again to our lovely and amazing co-hosts Sophia and Ellie. Also thanks to the amazing Tony Neofidel for diligently helping with everything in the background, James Gordon for his editorial input, and of course all of you lovely listeners. Alright, so thanks and have a good month.
Bye.
On FM, on digital radio, on your mobile and online. This is London Greek Radio.